The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, hi there. Welcome to this DeHavilland webinar focusing on the budget. I'm Aaron Russell, Head of Service at DeHavilland. I manage our team of consultants and analysts who provide our clients political information and intelligence. Here with me, and very much the brains of this particular duo, I have Mike Indian, one of our senior political analysts. Mike and his team are the ones who are listening to our debates and committees, producing our briefings, and the most recent one to go out has been the budget speculation document, which is always a very popular report that we produce and very much inform our discussion today. A reminder, if you have any questions for Mike and myself, you can email communications@dehavilland.co.uk or you can tweet us at DeHavilland. So, Mike, let's pretend you're the Chancellor. You're in a government that's in the middle of a very serious sex scandal. You're also trying to navigate the biggest constitutional challenge of a generation, and the opposition are breathing down your neck. You've got a housing crisis. You've got to help those that are just about managing, and reform our welfare systems under serious scrutiny. In addition, you've got a health and social care system that appears at breaking point, infrastructure that's in a mess. Your big target, though, is increasing productivity. And while you're doing all that, reduce the deficit. Let's not forget that a significant chunk of your colleagues and your boss apparently want you sacked. How would you pull it off?
Let's leave aside the fact I'd probably resign. So in all seriousness though, Aaron, Philip Hammond does face a nearly impossible task with this budget and a set of economic and political circumstances that none of his immediate predecessors have ever had to contend with. Besides the big existential ones, Brexit and the impact on the economy, his own concerns about productivity as well, there's the internal political dynamic of the government itself, which can at its very best be described perhaps as a poisonous atmosphere at the moment. They say a week is a long time in politics here, but we're facing potentially, as we broadcast today, perhaps the second cabinet minister to resign in a week. And for Mr. Hammond, since the election, we're basically dealing with the fact that he's been under constant speculation about whether or not he'll even still be in a job. That jockeying in the cabinet between the Remainers and the Leavers and his advocacy of a measured approach to Brexit hasn't won him any favours among his Conservative colleagues here. So this, for the Chancellor, for the government, for Theresa May, is a survive or thrive scenario. I suspect we're looking at a budget that's going to deal very much with the former rather than the latter. The challenges he's got to deal with, as I mentioned, Brexit, tackling intergenerational inequality and winning voters back among younger demographics to the Conservatives, funding for public services, addressing the impact of welfare reforms, his own pet project of productivity, and of course the all-important Tory mantra, when to reduce and eliminate the deficit.
Yeah, you spoke there, Mike, about sort of surviving seems to be the kind of main thing I'll be focusing on. But I think one area where we probably set something a bit more bold is on housing. We had the Community Secretary Sajid Javid on the Andrew Marr show recently talking about potentially borrowing £50 billion to build new homes. Now, borrowing to invest, that seems straight out Labour Party manifesto. Are we likely to see a new approach here?
In short, Aaron, I think, yes, we will see a new approach to housing set out in this manifesto, and the June election really weighs heavily on this too. In the aftermath of that, YouGov polled 18 to 34-year-olds and saw that only 4% of those polled felt the Conservative government's housing policies to date had been the right ones for them. These are voters that were drawn in by Labour's comparatively modest, building 250,000 new homes a year, which is in line with what's needed, but they felt that's what actually Labour was better placed to deliver that than the Tories. The reason that this matters is that the Conservatives' vote is largely ageing. It's very much built around encouraging home ownership since the time of Margaret Thatcher, and it's a dream that for many young voters is receding. Sajid Javid's idea about borrowing an extra £50 billion combined with another £100 billion underride to open up and build another 500,000 new homes is one that could be picked up by the government as well. But also Philip Hammond himself is rumoured to be looking at reform to the planning system. We're talking here about the reclassification of some form of greenbelt land that could be used to reclassify that for the building of new homes. There's also potential incentives on stamp duty for first-time buyers that could make an appearance. But, and this is important, there's been internal political struggles between Number 10, the Treasury, and Sajid Javid at DCLG over how to realise this. But like it or not, I think they'll be borrowing some element on this from the Labour playbook.
Yeah, you've talked about intergenerational inequality a couple of times there, Mike, and I think it's important to remember that this was the first election where age became the biggest determinant of how someone was going to vote, and not class. The housing issue really does seem to be a big one. Another one linked to that is obviously we've got inflation on the rise, interest rate rises will start to trickle through, welfare cuts affecting those in work as well as those out of work. Surely this is going to be the budget, the chance it delivers on the PM's very clear claim of trying to help those jams.
We would hope so, Aaron, because inflation hit 3% according to Consumer Price Index in October. Last week, the Bank of England raised interest rates for the first time in over a decade. Real wages have been falling for the first time since 2010. So what we really need to bear in mind here is that plenty of people in the country, both young and old, are feeling the pinch at the moment here. Now, one of the things that the government could look to do here would be perhaps to ensure that the national living wage is extended, perhaps to the people under 25 would be a good example. But one thing that's been weighing on people's minds, particularly for middle class families, the jams, don't forget, is that analogy, the just about managing that is contiguous with the Nick Clegg's alarm clock Britain and David Cameron's squeezed middle. What we're looking at here is those people who want to send their children to university, who are put off by the headline cost of tuition fees at £9,000. Now, Jeremy Corbyn has pledged, of course, to scrap tuition fees overall. What the government did in its party conference season, it went as far as freezing tuition fees at £9,250, but raising the repayment threshold. But the headline figure is still putting many young people off work as well. And don't forget, as long as inflation keeps rising, retail price index keeps going up, it's still hitting people on that newer system hardest with the repayments too. So there's some speculation whether Phil Hammond could take some steps to reduce the headline cost of tuition fees, perhaps by as much as £5,000 over the course of a degree. That would go a long way towards perhaps reassuring middle class families that the government is on their side and understands the predicament that they're in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the announcement they made during the conference season around increasing the threshold, freezing fees, didn't seem to land particularly well, and Labour seemed to be very much winning on this. And it is one of those issues that does cut across young generation, but then also their parents that also seem to be concerned about it. So we've covered voters off there quite well. What about business and investors? Remember, this will be the final budget before we're actually expected to conclude the Brexit negotiations. Remember, Michel Barnier wants negotiations concluded in October 2018 to give plenty of time for ratification. Are we expecting any sweetness for them, anything Brexit related, or will they try to make this a Brexit-free statement?
We can't make this a Brexit-free statement, Aaron, quite simply. The government's already overtly started to prepare for a no-deal scenario. According to David Davis, they're hiring up to 8,000 extra civil servants over the course of the period and spending over £500 million on preparing for a no-deal scenario. The Treasury's role in this, in the past, I suspect, will be to provide concrete economic modelling to prove that Brexit is not going to leave parts of the UK and sectors of the economy high and dry, or at least that the government understands and is prepared to take the steps to mitigate that as well. Away from that, though, there are the usual domestic political concerns to consider as well. For example, the government could look at for example, the Office of Tax Simplifications pointed out that current VAT thresholds for businesses are disincentivizing scale-ups, so there could see action taken on that. Budgets, particularly Philip Hammond's budgets, are infamous for dealing with techie tax policy. We also could see a response to the patient capital review in line with Philip Hammond's particular idea about addressing productivity. Away from that as well, we have to also bear in mind the government's delaying its planned abolition of Class 2 national insurance contributions. But the big thing that most people will have their eyes on is what the Chancellor is going to do in response to the much delayed review on business rates. Mr. Hammond is under increasing pressure to avoid the massive hike that's going to come in when the system is inevitably reformed here. Now, some sort of U-turn on this is looking increasingly likely. It was hinted by the Times as far back as recently, I should say, as the 5th of November, that the planned rise would be scrapped. As at the moment, the rate is linked to inflation at 3%. Of course, there's also the things that businesses lobby for quite intensively away from that, and the perennial one that Heathrow and other airports ask for year after year is a cut in air passenger duty to help stimulate domestic flights. But of course, all this is immaterial if the government cannot agree those crucial EU deals by the end of the Article 50 period.
So bringing this back to spending, Mike, another area, and we all remember what was on the side of that bus around when we were going through the referendum. Health and social care is clearly suffering from a lack of funds. You've had Simon Stevens today coming out calling for extra money for NHS. Labour clearly gaining traction when it comes to funding public services, specifically on public sector wages. Are we expecting anything in that area?
I think what we've got to bear in mind here, Aaron, is that some commentators, for example, George East, the New Statesman, have been calling for what they see as an unmistakable softening of austerity. Now, that, to my mind, is a little premature, given that the government is still overtly committed to eliminating the deficit within reason by the middle of the next decade. That said, however, got to bear in mind, as you mentioned there, we've seen Simon Stevens of NHS England calling today for the £350 million to be given to the NHS as well. Social care funding is something that is always going to need money to. It's something that the Prime Minister's come under consistent pressure for as well. But a real sign of movement on austerity would be the scrapping of the public sector pay cap for NHS workers. And I believe very strongly we are going to see some action on this inside this budget, for the simple reason we've already seen movement on police pay as well, and NHS workers enjoy widespread popular support in the country, and it would be a sign that the government understands the pressures which its policies are putting on many people who work in our most valued public services.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, there's so much here where you really do get the sense the government has to make a lot of people happy in this budget. It's a really, really big statement for the government. One of the other areas that they're clearly getting attacked from all sides, including on their own, is on universal credit. There's been some rumours that they're gonna move on the time frame. Is that likely in this budget?
Let's be clear here, the government isn't talking about scrapping universal credit here. The rollout is still progressing slowly but surely towards full completion by 2019. What instead we are likely to see is what's been the thorny issue for not only opposition MPs but also Tory MPs as well, which is a reduction in the 6-week waiting period. It's likely the Chancellor could bring that down to 5 weeks. That was according to James Forsyth of The Spectator as well. Crucially as well, we also need to consider how the payments would be made too, because one of the other criticism, that particularly from the Tory side, is the fact the payments come in monthly doesn't really coincide with how many people on benefits budget for their lives, which is usually on a week-to-week wage basis too. But welfare policy is tricky again, and it ties back into this narrative that the government has been largely obsessed with its own internal manoeuvring on this, particularly since the election. The appointment of Gavin Williamson to the Treasury demonstrated just how controversial even moving one minister around could be, and it isn't really focused on helping the people who really are feeling the pinch at the moment of inflation rising. But some movement on universal credit is likely, but the government looks set to continue steamrolling ahead, slowly but surely, with its flagship welfare reform, Aaron.
Yeah, it does seem like something has to happen on that one. So, I mean, one thing that came out of the conference season, for me personally, one thing the clients were saying to me was they were really planning for what a potential Labour government would look like. So, you know, it's after the election, it does seem now like a real possibility. So, I gave you a scenario at the beginning. I'm going to give you another one, Mike. I want you this time to pretend you're John McDonnell. And what would be the main themes of your budget for this month?
Well, comrade, let's be frank. This is for the first time we can really consider Labour to be in a position where we can consider them to be a credible force of government. The Conservatives' own internal weakness at this particular point, and we have to stress that things could change after today if Hammond delivers a strong budget, but we have to seriously consider what John McDonnell is proposing in his budget. He's been a very proactive Shadow Chancellor in the last 2 years, undertaking large amounts of economic studies, building credibility and getting economists around him. And thankfully, because of the election in June, we had a manifesto and a coherent set of policies of what a Labour government would like to achieve. And what we're really seeing here is a radical departure from what the Tories would do. Of course, there's the headline figures the Tories would go on, which is the increasing of income tax on those earning over £80,000. No national insurance and VAT increases also in the manifesto. The reversing of the Conservatives' corporation tax cuts back up to 26%, something that Labour has been consistently critical of at a time when other areas of spending are under pressure. That's, for example, how they might fund their policy, the flagship policy that won so many younger voters back to them, the one that's keeping CCHQ up at night, which is the scrapping of tuition fees. It would cost £11.5 billion. It's unclear whether a Labour government would go further and forgive student debt for those who've already been to university, given the extra cost that would impose. But scrapping tuition fees is a very popular policy and is one that has probably, out of all the things on that list, had the greatest impact in terms of what the Conservatives have done since June. But beyond that as well, the government, a Labour government, have to demonstrate that it has a new fiscal credibility rule in effect. Labour's manifesto stated there would be no borrowing for day-to-day spending, and this is John McDonnell at his best here, manoeuvring cannily to get away from the old tax and spend argument that the Tories would try and hit him with as some sort of antiquated creature of the 70s. This is the fact that Labour is moving on this issue now to try and show that it is committed to keeping public finances responsible, and which leads on to the next policy, which is worth talking about, investing in national infrastructure. John McDonnell's National Transformation Fund, £250 billion of borrowing plus £250 billion of private capital for infrastructure investment, improving productivity, particularly in the north of England, where, don't forget, the Conservatives' Northern Powerhouse vision has, to say the least, flagged in the 15 months since Theresa May kicked George Osborne to the curb. With delays in rail electrification and a lack of investment while London is pressing ahead with projects such as Crossrail 2, McDonnell is going to look to ensure that Labour invests in all parts of the country. And finally, you couldn't get away with the McDonnell budget without some form of nationalisation being in there as well. Beloved railways, water companies, and Royal Mail.
So it'd be very different then. I think there's the short sort of conclusion there. Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. Thanks very much for that, Mike. Just a reminder then for our customers of what we'll be doing around the budget. We'll be producing an update to our speculation document. So as we get closer and closer, we'll do at least another one of those. The day itself will, of course, be sending relevant documents over to you and pulling out important announcements as well. And at the end of the day, we do a roundup of the key announcements as well as stakeholder responses. And this is broken down by the different sectors. Hopefully we can save you a bit of time doing it yourself, or maybe we'll spot something you didn't. If you want any more information regarding our Brexit coverage, or budget coverage, sorry, do email us at communications@dehavilland.co.uk. Thank you very much.